Shalom, how's everyone doing? Today is day 49 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and we're learning Siman Vav, Seif Beis. Let's begin. Kishum Mevarich, when somebody makes a bracha, Yehei Piv Naki Min Aruch, his mouth should be free from spit. Vigam Sha'ar Davar Lo Yehei B'Soch Piv, other things shouldn't be in his mouth. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Yimalei Piti L'Secha, my mouth will be filled with your praise. So there's a Gemara in Maseches Brachos that talks about if somebody forgets to make a bracha, he puts food in his mouth. So now what does he do? So the Gemara says, if he's able to, if the food won't get ruined, he actually has to spit out the food, make a bracha, put the food back in his mouth. So the Gemara asks, come on, just say a bracha with the food in your mouth, what's so bad? So the Gemara says, no, we don't do that, because the pasuk says, Yimalei Piti L'Secha, my mouth will be filled with your praise, that when we make a bracha, our entire mouth should be praising Hashem. We can't have anything else in it that will ruin the praise, basically. If you look in the Rambam in the 8th parak of Hilchos Brachos, he says that when somebody makes a bracha, he should have a piv panoi. He should have a totally free mouth, right? Nothing should be in it, right? So based off this, the Rebbe Ephraim writes in a Tshuva, and he says, seemingly even crumbs are a problem. And he says it's a very prevalent thing that, a lot of times when people sit down to eat, right, the first thing they'll eat is a mizonos food, because that's the first food that comes first. But mizonos foods have a lot of crumbs. So what's going to happen? He's going to eat the mizonos food, and there's going to be crumbs in his mouth, and then he's going to eat the next food, and the crumbs will still be there. So he says that's not l'chilchila. You should make sure there's no crumbs in your mouth, and then finally you make a new bracha. Right? He also points out that it's okay if food's in your teeth. How does he know it's okay if there's food in the teeth? Because that's Mefresh Rambam. Right? The Rambam says that you're supposed to wait 6 hours after you eat meat before you have milk. Why do you have to wait 6 hours? The Rambam says, because for the next 6 hours there's a chashash, we're afraid that meat is stuck in the teeth. So I'll ask you a question. How has this guy been saying brachos for 6 hours? How did he say a bracha achron on the meat? Right? His mouth wasn't panoi, his mouth had food in it. So, no, the teeth, having food in the teeth is not a problem of Yimalei Piti L'Secha, it's only if you have food in the actual mouth. Okay, also based on this, if you look in the Eshel Rabbi Bachach, he talks about spit, right? The Kitzur talked about spit. So he says, no, we're not gonna say you can't make a bracha if there's spit in your mouth. He says we only don't let you say a bracha if there's so much spit in your mouth that it will affect your speech. Right? That's how he learns it. He learns that the spin of Yimalei Piti L'Secha is only a problem if the thing in your mouth affects your speech. So based off this, the Rebbe Ephraim says that let's say somebody has dentures, right? Can he daven with dentures on, right? You might tell me, no, his mouth isn't free, right? There's a outside substance that's in his mouth. Maybe he can't daven right now. But Rebbe Ephraim says, no, it's okay, because the dentures are actually there to help him speak. So it would not be a problem if Yimalei Piti L'Secha. But if you look in the Piskei Teshuvos, he brings down something like a very practical thing that he says comes up a lot, and he says, really, l'chor should be a problem, is that a lot of times when women, especially, are washing their hands, like before a meal, they usually take off their rings, right? Seemingly that is the din, as we'll get to one day. They take off their rings, but usually they don't have anywhere to put it, so they put it in their mouth. Okay, that's fine. But then they wash their hands, they want to make a bracha. A lot of times they'll actually make a bracha with the ring in their mouth. So he says that's a big problem of Yimalei Piti L'Secha, or you can't have a foreign substance in your mouth, especially a ring that's going to affect the way you talk. So he says that l'chor should be a problem. The Mishnah Berurah quotes the Eshkol, who says that, right, if you take the Pasha reading of the pasuk Yimalei Piti L'Secha, my mouth will be filled with your praise. The Pasha Pshat means that when somebody says a bracha, he should, his whole mouth should be involved. Basically, he shouldn't mumble the bracha. He should say it clearly, and that's really the Pasha Pshat of the pasuk, and that's something we should be careful about. But dealing with brachos, something we didn't mention yesterday, something we probably won't mention tomorrow, but an important idea when it comes to brachos, right? Obviously, every time we say a bracha, we say Barachata Hashem. We say Shem Hashem. And there's actually a couple halachos about mentioning Shem Hashem. If you look in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Hey, he says that when somebody mentions Shem Hashem, he has to have two things in mind. One, he has to mention the name he's mentioning, right? What do we say? Aleph Daled Nun Yun, right? That's the name he mentions. And when you say that, you should think Adon HaKol, right? That Hashem is the master over everything, right? So when we say Hashem's name, right, we're going to say Aleph Daled Nun Yun. That represents Adon HaKol, Hashem's master over everything. Okay, that's great. But he says you should also have another kavanah in mind. And he says, how is Hashem's name written? Like in the Torah, how's it written? It's written Yud Kei Vav Kei. What does Yud Kei Vav Kei represent? Shulchan Aruch says, he says it represents Haya Hova V'Yeh. Hashem was, Hashem is, Hashem always will be. So he actually says, when one is saying Shem Hashem, you should have both these things in mind. If you look in the Gra argues. The Gra says, wait a second. A lot of times in the Torah, it's written one way, but we pronounce it another way. And in regards to everything, we usually go by the way it's pronounced. We go by the way it's said. So he says Shem Hashem is no different. True, it's written in the Torah, Yud Kei Vav Kei. But you don't have to be thinking that. You don't have to think Hayahova V'Yeh. You just have to think the way it is pronounced, which is Adon Hakol. Right? So the Gra says no. When we're saying Shem Hashem, we don't have to think of Hayahova V'Yeh. We just have to think that Hashem is the Adon Hakol. Hashem is the master over everything. So the Gra says, you know where the Shulchan Aruch got this wrong? Because the Shulchan Aruch saw this in Rabbeinu Yonah. That Rabbeinu Yonah writes, when one says Shema, he should think about Hayahova V'Yeh. Right? So the Shulchan Aruch thought, right, that every time you say Hashem's name, you should think Hayahova V'Yeh, but the way the Gra understands that Rabbeinu Yonah is no. Rabbeinu Yonah is saying specifically when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, when we say Hashem's name in Shema, at least in the first pasuk, only then you have to think Hayahova V'Yeh. Why does the Gra say this is just a Shema halacha? Right? Where is he coming from? So seemingly it's coming from a Gemara Masechus Pesachim. Right? There's an interesting Gemara Masechus Pesachim that quotes the following pasuk. It says, "B'ayamahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad." One day Hashem will be one and His name will be one. So the Gemara says, one day Hashem will be one. Is Hashem not one right now? So the Gemara says, no. In this world, Hashem's name is written Yud Kei Vav Kei, and it's pronounced Aleph Daled Nun Yud. But in Olam Haba, Hashem's name will not only be written Yud Kei Vav Kei, but it will also be pronounced Yud Kei Vav Kei. So that's what it means, that one day Hashem's name will be one. So seemingly, in Olam Hazeh, in this world, Hashem's name is not really one yet. Right? We're hoping for the day that Hashem's name will finally be one, that it will actually we'll be able to pronounce it Yud Kei Vav Kei. But now we just pronounce it Aleph Daled Nun Yud. The Gemara also says there, another difference between Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. In Olam Hazeh, when something bad happens, we say a bracha, Baruch Dayan Ha'emes. Right, that's what we say. Something if we hear bad news. In Olam Haba, Las Lava, we're not going to say that bracha. But these two Gemaras have one basic yisod. Right, and the Tzlach explains the Gemara. The Tzlach says, what does the name Aleph Daled Nun Yud represent? Obviously, it represents Adon Hakol. But what's an Adon? What's a master? A master that's usually represents Midas Hadin, Hashem's judgment, as opposed to Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is more about Hashem's mercy. So that's how the Tzlach explains it. B'zman hazeh, in this world, we see a lot of judgment. Like sometimes we see like a lot of bad things happening. Right? Hashem's Midas Hadin is really prevalent over the world. Right? And he explains the next Gemara. That's why the next Gemara says we say Dayan Ha'emes a lot. When we hear bad news, like seemingly we see all this Midas Hadin, and we talk about Hashem being the judge. However, in the next world, we're only going to see Rachamim. Right? So we're going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei. We're not going to say Dayan Ha'emes. Right? And even though in this world it's really Rachamim, it's not really Din, we just don't understand it. But in the next world we're going to understand everything. It's going to be super clear that everything Hashem does is for Rachamim, and that's why only in the next world we're actually going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei. Oh, and now we could explain why the Gra holds that when you're saying Shema, you should think Yud Kei Vav Kei, because Shema isn't just us declaring that Hashem is one. Shema is also a bakasha, it's a request for the future, that we're hoping that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, right, that we hope that one day Hashem will truly be one, that we'll be able to pronounce Yud Kei Vav Kei. And that's really what we're asking for. And that's why it makes sense that when we're actually saying Shema, that's what we're asking for. We're asking for Hashem to be pronounced Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's when we think to ourselves, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Right? That's why the Gra holds, specifically by Shema, you should have this intention of Yud Kei Vav Kei, but throughout the day, one does not need to. Okay. But now let's go back to the sheet of Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch says the whole day you're supposed to think to yourself Yud Kei Vav Kei. But the Gra had a very good question. We usually only go by the way it's pronounced, not the way it's written. So this could be answered based off the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Rav has a major yesod. He learns this from the Rambam, that usually in the Torah, when we have something that's written one way and pronounced another way, we always go by the way it's pronounced. And yeah, that's called Torah Kula. But when it comes to Shem Hashem, it's different. How does he explain it? He says, true, Shem Hashem is written Yud Kei Vav Kei. But when we pronounce it as Aleph Daled Nun Yud, when we pronounce it with the Shem Adnus, that's not a different word. it's the same word. Well, what does that mean? So, this could also be explained based on what the Slach said. Right? The Slach said, in this world, we say Aleph Daled Nun Yud because there's a lot of Midas Hadin. In the next world, we're not going to see the Midas Hadin, we're going to see the Midas Rachamim, therefore we're going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei. But really, when we say the name of Aleph Daled Nun Yud, B'zman Hazeh, that's not our hope. Our hope is to actually say the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So therefore, now we can explain Shulchan Aruch, right? Shulchan Aruch would say no, usually throughout the Torah there are different words. But here, the Aleph Daled Nun Yud, that's not where we're getting to. We want to get to the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Therefore, throughout the day, when we say Shem Hashem, we think to ourselves what we're really hoping for. We're really hoping for the day that we could, that we could really say the Yud Kei Vav Kei. And that's what we want to think also when we say brachos. So that's really the machlokas, right? The machlokas between the Gra and the Shulchan Aruch about, is this all day halacha whenever we say Shem Hashem, or is it just a Shema halacha? So, if you look in Halichus Shlomo, Shlomo Zalman is quoting from previous Achronim, who say there's a way out of this. That at the beginning of the day, before you say Shem Hashem for the first time, you could make a Tanai. You could say to yourself, I know really I want to hold the Shulchan Aruch, and throughout the entire day, I want to think to myself, Hayahoviyah, but that's going to be too difficult. So I'm just going to do it once, and that will take me the rest of the day. So that's what Halichus Shlomo, basically quoting earlier Achronim, says to do. And if you look in other Achorim, they say that we do this when we say Adon Olam. Right? Think about it. Why is there a minhag to say Adon Olam in the morning before we say Birchas HaShachar? What are the first lines of Adon Olam? Adon Olam Asher Malach. Right? That means Hashem was in the past. B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra. Right? And then the world was created. That's right now. Fine. Azai Melech Shmonikra. Right? Then we say That's what Adon Olam is about. Adon Olam is us explaining that Hashem ruled in the past, right now, and also in the future. So when one says Adon Olam, maybe one should think that the thoughts of Adon Olam will take me out through the entire day. Okay,